Hey, good afternoon, beautiful people. This is Portia at Penguin Random House, and I'm thrilled to join you with yet another incredible author lined up for Afropunk's Rock and Read. Thank you, Afropunk, for letting us join you for another year. We wish we were in person. But today we are here with James Beard award-winning chef, food activist, music lover, Bryant Terry. Bryant, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, Portia. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you, and gratitude to Afropunk. Been affiliated with Afropunk for, I guess, since 2014 was the first formal event we did in Brooklyn, where Greenlight Books had a tent at the festival. So I got a chance to come out, sign books, meet folks, and obviously listen to some badass bands and performances. So that was, yeah, thank you, Afropunk.
Bryant, I want to give you as much time as possible, but I also need to give you some props and let folks know exactly who you are and what you're doing here. You, again, James Beard Award winner, you are renowned for your activism to create a healthy, just, and sustainable food system. You are a chef in residence at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. Where you create public programming, and I like this, at the intersection of food, farming, health, activism, art, culture, and the African diaspora. Your books include Vegan Soul Kitchen, #1, your first baby, The Inspired Vegan, Grub, Afro-Vegan, and the latest bestseller, Vegetable Kingdom. So thank you again, Brian, for being here with us.
But don't forget, so I think a lot of times people often forget that this is actually my first book, Grub Ideas.
Oh, that came first.
Yeah, so this was when I co-authored this with my friend and colleague and mentor, Anna LePay. So I don't want to, this is my first baby right here, so I got to make sure.
Okay, all right. Thank you for correcting the record.
It's all good.
Can you introduce us to Vegetable Kingdom?
Yeah, Vegetable Kingdom is my latest book, which was published February of this year. Unfortunately, COVID-19 came and my book tour was abruptly ended. And I did get an opportunity to do some events. I went to Seattle and got a chance to hang out with my buddy Eduardo Jordan, and we did an event dinner at his restaurant. I got a chance to go to New Haven and do some events at Yale. And some other places, but you know, I have to say, I was talking to my friend W. Kamal Bell, the comedian, and I was saying, you know, I'm really glad that over the past several months, people started liking Black people again, because this book has been, we can't keep it on the shelf. I mean, it just got back on Amazon.com because it had been sold out for several weeks, and I'm just glad that in this moment, we're able to use, you know, these virtual technologies to continue to promote, because this is an important book. And, you know, I think the biggest thing that was frustrating for me is I spent 2 years working on this project, all this, you know, anticipation and excitement building up to the tour. So there was a period of sadness, but I'm glad that we were able to figure out how to continue to promote it, even in this, you know, historical moment.
Boy, this historical moment. Can you take us inside the book and read a bit from it?
I would love to. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from the introduction. And it's, the title of the introduction is Fennel for Zinzi. And Zinzi's my youngest daughter, Zinzi Lay. We named her after Miriam Makeba, the South African singer. It's her birth. Vegetable Kingdom is inspired by my daughters, Mila and Zinzi. They have blessed this book like my ancestors blessed meals by humbling me to that which is greater than myself. When Mila pulls a gloriously resonant hum out of her cello, and when Zinzi dances in energetic spins and wild flourishes, they're turning the love and effort I pour into them into a vitality and power that they will carry on far beyond what I could ever know. I wrote this book to make a diversity of foods of the plant kingdom irresistible to them, to inspire their curiosity, and to show them the pleasure of a lifelong adventure with good, nourishing food. That mission drives this book. Vegetable Kingdom reflects the essence of how my wife, Jadon, and I root and raise our children. Mila and Zenzi have been rooted in the garden with farm fresh ingredients and raised on a diversity of dishes springing from the deep well of Black and Asian foodways. We help shape their multicultural identity organically by creating and consuming Afro-Asian food and the spectrum of flavors they engage, often in the same meal. While I emphasize ingredients, cooking techniques, and classic dishes of the African diaspora, Jadon does the same with Asian food, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese. So this book features a number of ingredients and flavors from East and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, and the American South. With such an emphasis, well, no, with such an expanse of cultural ground to cover, it is serendipitous that it was the Mediterranean, a region at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, and one of its hardiest vegetables, fennel, that acted as a catalyst for unifying the dynamic spirit and energy that permeates this book. A few years ago, I was at the farmer's market checking out the late summer, early fall bounty, flavorful seascape strawberries, fresh cranberry shelling beans, vibrant red burgundy okra, and plump pomegranates, to name a few. I'm looking at your facial expressions.
I've never heard of some of these things. Sorry, keep going.
That morning, fennel was all over the place. The bulbs glowed bright white, the stalks and fronds were moist and fresh, and their anise-like aroma was strong. One stand offered samples of crunchy sweet slices with fresh lemon squeeze over them. I had never really bought fennel unless a recipe required it, but that day, the fennel was calling me. Your boy bought 4 bunches on the strength of that smorgasbord for the senses. Driving home, I decided I would use every part of the fennel. I envisioned the feathery fronds as a garnish, flashing back to Instagram posts by some of my favorite chefs, like Chef JJ, Rob McDaniel, and Jeremy Fox, creatively balancing color and making dishes pop by arranging fresh herbs, microgreens, and citrus zest on top of them. I figured I would put the fennel stems into the freezer along with the other vegetable scraps reserved for stocks. I had no idea how I would cook the bulb that day, even though it is the only part I really used in the past. I'm almost done. Regardless of how I prepared the fennel, I was a little nervous that Zenzi, my 5-year-old, would not be into it. Mila, my 8-year-old, has always had an adventurous palate. She loves to try different cuisines and takes pride in eating unfamiliar dishes. Zenzi, on the other hand, would be happy if she had pasta, bread, and crackers at every meal. My other goal was to create a dish through the lens of the African diaspora, inspired by visual artists Romare Bearden, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Deborah Roberts, and Derek Adams, as well as some of my favorite hip-hop producers like Prince Paul, The Bomb Squad, DJ Premier, RZA, Organized Noise, and Madlib. I have approached recipe development as a collagist, curating, cutting, pasting, and remixing staple ingredients, cooking techniques, and traditional Black dishes popular throughout the world to make my own signature recipes. I'll leave it at that.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So first time I've seen, and I've worked on a cookbook with Maya Angelou, first time I've seen art portrayed in a cookbook in this way. Definitely first time I've seen the Bomb Squad shouted out in a cookbook for anyone. I mean, also, hi, Eric. So how did you do that? How did the food book world, the culinary book world, respond to you wanting to bring all of this flavor to your description of very important flavors we need to incorporate more of?
Yeah. You know, the thing about my approach to cookbook writing is that, like, I do a lot of extensive research when I'm working on a new book project, looking at cookbooks and, you know, going to restaurants, eating at friends' homes, just really diving into the food specific research. But, you know, as a creative person who loves film and music and art and culture, like all those things feed me, and all those become the fodder from which I draw to create, you know, my projects. And so I've been doing this, and I'll say a lot of it is inspired by my own kind of like connection with food. I think you know that, you know, in terms of like deciding that I wanted to become a vegan, it was because of the hip hop song Beef by Boogie Down Productions, and its lead singer KRS-One. And so, you know, for me, I've always done this, like from my first book, even Grub. I mean, we had like the recipes, but I included a soundtrack with every menu. I would suggest films and books. And so all the things that feed me, I like to share that with others. And I just feel lucky now that I have, you know, because like this was a black and white book. And so, I mean, well, actually they didn't want to give us full color book. This is 2006.
Two color.
Yeah, it was 2-color. And so we were like, well, can we just have green text instead of black? So they did give us that. But, you know, I've always tried to do this, and I just feel so lucky that now I have the resources to do it the right way. You know, 4-color, beautiful images, you know, having the ability to even have like Spotify where I can create a Vegetable Kingdom soundtrack. So all the songs that I recommend with every recipe, you can go right to Spotify and look up Vegetable Kingdom and you have access to them. So this is what I do.
Fantastic. So you were inspired to become a vegan because of KRS-One. Also, shout to KRS-One and the idea that, remember when people said, oh, all rap does is glorify violence, and if people listen to this music full time, they're just going to be violent. No, they're going to be vegan. That's a thing.
Right.
How did your family respond to that? And how did you actually incorporate that? Because at 13, were you cooking your own meals? Were you able to? How did that work out?
I was a little older than 13. I think I was like a sophomore in high school. But, you know, I think in order for me to talk about like that whole period, I need to kind of go back and talk a little bit about, because I'm sure you've heard this, right? There's this perception that a lot of people have had historically that plant-based eating, vegetarian veganism, they're the kind of practices of upper middle class white suburbanites. And more recently, you know, the kind of white gentrifying class in urban centers. And I think it's important that I always talk about the early influences, just my introduction to these ideas and how they came from Black folks. You know, the first time I even like encountered any ideas about eating a vegetarian or vegan diet, it was from Seventh Day Adventists, who were family friends. And they talked about that kind of the theologically driven, you know, way in which they connected with food and ate. And so, you know, hearing about that, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and then learning more about the Nation of Islam. I mean, Elijah Muhammad had a very strong health ministry. In fact, he wrote 2 books, How to Eat to Live, Part 1 and 2, where he was instructing Black folks on the ways that he argued we should be eating for our better health and longevity. You know, I think about many hip hop artists from KRS-One to Brand Nubian to Gangstar, you know, these rappers who were influenced by the Nation of Islam or the 5% Nation of Gods and Nerds, and they talked about food in their lyrics. I think about when I heard beef, and I'll say this, whatever perception you might have, Porscha, of the most judgmental, dogmatic, self-righteous, judgmental vegan, you know, this stereotype that we often have of people who are vegans, I was that guy after I heard beef. And to this day, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad, for being such a jerk back then. But, you know, like, I started going to the health food store. It was the health food store in Memphis, downtown Memphis, that I would often go to. And I would meet these Black elders who embraced a plant-based diet. I would meet these older Black Rastafarians who had an ITAL diet, which is, you know, devoid of any chemicals and meat and all that. You know, I'd meet folks who, you know, for whatever theological reasons, like I met this Buddhist, this older Black brother who was like, Buddhism brought me to this. So those were my mentors and elders who helped teach me. I think about, you know, Dick Gregory, the comedian and social justice activist. That was one of the first books that really broke down all these different dietary models and helped me think about my own personal connection with food in that way. And so I just feel like it's important for me to share that, because it's like, you know, so often our food, our habits, the way that we live are vilified in this racist way. And I think it's important for me to illuminate and draw this thread throughout the 20th century of Black-led food and health activism. And I just I'm standing on the shoulders of all those people. Those were my teachers. I'm certainly not saying that I'm inventing anything new or creating anything. I'm just kind of packaging this in a way that I think makes sense, but the ultimate goal is liberation, and just more healthy and whole lives for our people and everyone.
Thank you. I'm in. I say that now, that's very easy to say when you're not hungry, but we'll see how this goes. So then, okay, here's a question. What is a tip that you would give to somebody who is inspired in this way, but is so addicted to something, let's say like cheese, that they couldn't say I'm all in the way a friend might want to say she was all in?
That's a great question. And, my approach has always been, when talking to people who are interested in transitioning from a standard American diet or a very meat-centric diet, my approach has always been gradualism. I mean, I think, people have different personalities. Some people, they need that kind of cold turkey. Like, I'm done. I'm not touching animal products again. And that works for them. But what I found so often is that people will have these kind of idealistic ways or visions of how they're just going to drop all animal products when they may have never like had, an absence of those things in their diet. And then initially with the, endorphins and excitement of just being, having a different worldview or practicing different habits, it can work. But in terms of long-term sustainability, I've seen a lot of people who are just like, oh, okay, I went to somewhere, they didn't have any vegan options, so now I'm just eating meat again. And so I just think that there needs to be balance. And I think that when you educate yourself about the ways to feed ourselves properly, because you can have a vegetarian or vegan diet and it can still be crappy. It can still be replete with processed foods, packaged foods, fast foods. And in fact, the multinational corporations that largely control our food system, they are very clear that this is a growing trend. There's a market hungriness, pun intended, for more plant-based and vegan options. And so what they do is they will, label things as vegan. They will like describe them as healthy, while these things often like, healthy, natural, these things don't have a legal definition, but they're marketing terms that they use to draw people in. And so, my whole thing is, I understand if you're purely driven by like ethical reasons, like I don't want to hurt animals. I know in our industrialized food system, animals are treated horribly. I get it, but I think that in terms of our own health and well-being, we have to be eating, I talk about vegetable-centric diets, right? Vegetable forward diets, because it's not just enough to eliminate animal products. We need to be eating a lot of whole grains and vegetables and legumes, these things that actually build our immune system and help us to be, whole and happy and, age gracefully. So I just think it's about like doing what works for you, figuring out what feels good. I often tell people to keep a food journal because, maybe being a raw foodist would be perfect for you for a couple months. But then when the winter comes, it's colder, our bodies are yearning and craving more grounding and warming things like soups and stews and root vegetables and legumes. We need to listen to that and not be so dogmatic about how we imagine whatever this panacea is, and we aren't listening to our body and kind of following that. So those are some tips that I share with folks.
Ooh, you now have my editorial wheels spinning. I'm like, food journal, got it. Like, they let me be on the Potter team with our incredible gift program. Got a brainstorming session soon. Thank you, Bryant. I will give you credit in the meeting.
I appreciate that.
So, okay, where would I start? Are there some go-to vegetables? Like I'm going to have a more vegetable forward diet and I'm going grocery shopping to get started. Where should I start?
That's a great question. And I think you should start by eating the foods that your grandmother and your great-grandmother and your great-grandmother ate. One thing that I think is often missing from conversations about eating healthfully and how we imagine what a healthful diet is, are embracing and consuming our cultural foods. Before the kind of industrialization of our food system and this kind of processed packaged fast food culture that we live in, people were growing their own food. People were eating these traditional foods that often included animal products. I have a lot to say about the inclusion of animal products outside of my ethical concerns, but we can get into that another time. But I do think it's important, especially when you have elders who are around and who were connected to these kind of traditional diets, to talk to them and find out and learn skills. There's so many elders who grew up on farms. They have agrarian knowledge. They know how to grow food. Like, we should be in the gardens with them. We should be in the community gardens and the urban farms, connecting with them and learning with them. You know, so many of them, despite the way in which so often I feel like you see stories in the New York Times or these glossy magazines about like canning and pickling and preserving. It's often like, you know, cute college educated white girls who are like being kind of uplifted for these practices, when these are ancestral practices that I know I have in my family. And when I talk across the country, I talk to people and I'm like, you know, how many of your family members had home gardens? How many of your ancestors grew up on farms? How many of your grandparents, or your big mama and Medea used to can and pickle and preserve? There's this cultural amnesia where I think we even forget a lot of these practices have been in our own families. And I think we need to remember, piece back these histories. And one easy way to do that is connecting with our elders. But I want to say, on that note of eating cultural foods, you know, I've been pushing back throughout my career against this kind of like reductive way in which people often talk about Black food. And so often when people, I found that they kind of imagine Black food in two ways, right? So one, people often say, well, Black food, that's just slave food. You know, that's just the remnants of plantation owners' tables, you know, whatever the white folks didn't want to eat, that they gave us the worst scraps that were left from the vegetables, the animal viscera, and we kind of created a way, and that might be part of the story, but, you know, saying that that's like the kind of totality, it's ahistorical in that slavery, the institution of slavery wasn't a monolith. You know, the way it looked in the kind of Black belt looked different than coastal Carolinas, looked different than Louisiana, looked different in the Caribbean. And so just like making these blanket statements, it erases the history of some, like in the Caribbean, for example, people might have a day off where they can cultivate their own garden, where they can actually like hunt for animals to supplement the protein. So all that to say is this idea that, well, it's just slave food is historically inaccurate. And it's much more complex. But the other thing that people will often say is, well, you know, soul food. When they say Black food, in their mind, what they mean is, well, that's soul food. Soul food is Black food. And when they think soul food, what they often are imagining are like the kind of heavy flavored, you know, deep fried, you know, the stuff you would find most often at restaurants, you know, deep fried fatty meats, sugary desserts, carby sides, overcooked vegetables. And I'm not even trying to deny that. Like, that's a part of our culinary history as well. You know, eating chitlins is a part of our culinary history. But what people often erase are the ways in which, you know, just if you think about farm fresh food, if you think about the food that I think any Western trained allopathic physician, dietitian, nutritionist would say we all should be eating, these are the staples of our cuisine. Nutrient-dense leafy greens like collards, mustards, turnips, kale, dandelions, black-eyed peas, butter beans, pole beans. Like, these are healthful foods at their core. So I say that if we want to find health liberation, we needn't look any further than our own foods. And I encourage all people to lean on their cultural foods as a way to you know, I mean, not just like connect on a helpful way, but you're connecting with like family, history, memories. It's a part of who we are. And I think we need to get off this industrial treadmill and remember those aspects of our history and culture as well.
Wow. Now I'm like smiling big and thinking, oh, right, cabbage. Like, okay, if I'm going, but it didn't occur to me, oh, right, that is what my grandmother cooked.
Yeah.
I would think of, no, cabbage is that thing that they eat, but you're right, that is a phenomenal place to start, and it warms you up and is more likely to create a positive culinary experience that you would want to revisit again because of the feeling, the emotion involved, and the connection. Wow,
Porscha, can I just say one thing that upsets me? When I think about my grandparents' neighborhood, you know, I grew up in Memphis. They moved to Memphis when they were young, but they came from families that had farms in rural Tennessee and rural Mississippi. And so obviously they brought with them those traditions and the agrarian knowledge and the desire to grow their own food. In fact, my grandfather, one of the things he used to say to me, like, it used to bug me because I'm like, why do you repeat this every time you have me out here slaving in this garden, weeding and picking, snapping beans and shucking corn? But he used to always remind me that if you rely on someone else to feed you, when they decide that they don't want to, you'll starve. And he used to hammer that in while we were actually working in the garden. And like, you know, it wasn't even a garden. Every bit of available space that he had, he was using to grow food in his backyard. And when you walked around the neighborhood, you would see most neighbors, I mean, whether it was just like tomato plants on their front porch or like mini orchards with like nectarine trees, pear trees, peach trees in their backyards, everyone was producing, or many people were producing some type of food. And they had this local thriving food system in this working class neighborhood in South Memphis, Tennessee. And then when I go back to that neighborhood now, it's like it's a shell of itself. You don't see any fruit trees. There are very few gardens, if any. And statistically, that's one of the neighborhoods that has some of the highest rates of preventable diet-related illness, heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes. I know there are a number of complicated reasons that lend to these statistics, but food is a big part of it. And I recognize that if we aren't growing our own food, if we are being seduced by these multinational corporations and eating this crappy processed packaged food, you know, it's almost, I feel like we're dishonoring our ancestors in some ways because they knew better. And so we need to know better and do better. And I mean, we could talk about the structural reasons that a lot of communities may not have access to healthy, fresh, affordable food. So I'm not blaming the victim, but I'm encouraging us to all kind of like reach back and think about these traditions that we can re-embrace that will actually lead to our like community healing.
And more than encouraging, you are actually inspiring it. And it's subtle. Like there are things like in talking about some of those traditional foods that we would think of as Black food, you didn't mention the meal itself, right? You spoke in broader terms. So as not to activate whatever that kind of addiction is. Like, no, but you would lean into describing the black eyed peas, the dandelion greens, the turnips, the mustards. Like, you're very good at what you do.
Thank you.
How did you learn this? You hear a record like Beef, you're like, okay, I want to turn away from this. Where did you start to actively learn? Were all of those resources, had you already read the autobiography of Malcolm X? Had you already experienced, we were talking beforehand about Gerda May Grosvenor's vibration cooking. Like, were those already in your wheelhouse? Yeah, can you show it to everyone? Because wow, classic. Classic, edited by Toni Morrison.
This is not Beef, but this was one of my first Boogie Down production single my dad got me. You know the rules. I always say that so much of what I am attempting, what I'm imparting to people are things that I learned in my grandparents' garden and kitchen. You know, I spent a lot of time in my paternal grandfather's garden. And I kind of jokingly, I always have jokingly like say, oh, he was exploiting our labor, because I'm not going to romanticize it and pretend like I love being out there. I didn't. I wanted to be in the house playing video games or reading or doing something. But he insisted that all the grandkids be a part of the garden. And so we had to weed, we had to plant, we had to shuck corn and shell peas and all that. And like now as a parent, as an adult, I'm just like, thank you. I got the time to have this, you know, intimate relationship in the garden with my paternal grandfather. And I learned about the whole seed to table process because, you know, we can talk about, and once again, you know, thinking about the way in which the kind of movement in California around fresh, local, seasonal cuisine. You know, so often I think when people hear those terms, once again, they think about like these fancy restaurants that are often run by white chefs, or they think about, you know, this movement that Alice Waters was a big part of kickstarting. But you know, people don't immediately think about like Black folks. And what I'm here to say is, once again, these are our traditions. These are the things that we did for survival. You know, it wasn't like my granddad was like, you know, I got this cool garden and I'm like, you know, doing like sustainable agriculture. It was like, no, that's what was economically sustainable, because growing your food allowed you to save your hard-earned money for other things than spending it at some corporate-owned supermarket. So a number of reasons, but it was that, but it was also spending time with my maternal grandmother, where I learned about this whole concept of slow cooking. She didn't call it that, right? We talk about slow food. We think, Western Europe. We think Italy. We think Carlo Petrini, the brilliant far left activist who helped start that movement. But you can't tell me that when my grandmother was in the kitchen on Saturday cooking all day for supper on Sunday, that wasn't soul food cooking. The fact that she was literally going out to her garden and harvesting things to then cook for that meal, the fact that she was making cornbread and cakes and, just taking her time and using all real ingredients. Those are the things that I am hoping to inspire people to do. I think a lot of hardcore like vegan abolitionists who are more into just like closing factory farms and really are enraged by the violent way that animals are treated in our industrial food system. I think a lot of people want me to be focused on that, and I think it's important that people know that, and I talk about that, but I think there are people who should talk about that in a more expanded way. I think the issues that I want to talk about, they're so complicated that I'm not going to reduce it to just like everyone should be a vegan, because frankly, for health reasons, I don't necessarily believe that that's the case. I can make arguments all day about why, ethical reasons, environmental reasons, economic reasons, why it makes sense for most of us to have a plant-based diet. But I don't like getting, I'm not going to be the person who's going to make this claim that a vegan diet is a diet that we all should be on. Because first of all, I'm not a physician, so I would never give medical advice. But secondly, I think we're all, our bodies are different. Our health constitution, our cultural foodways, all these things I think should contribute to what foods we're eating. And if you're telling me that like some people who are living in the plains in Africa and that, the kind of foods that they're eating because of the geographic location that they're living in, that they should eat a vegan diet and go to Whole Foods and buy all these expensive products labeled as vegan, it's like, you don't really believe that. And that's not, it doesn't make sense. So anyway, that's a whole other thing that we could talk about in another conversation.
Okay, so now you are watching your maternal grandmother prepare all of these meals, right? There's a big disconnect between how she's preparing these meals, or maybe there isn't, and writing out a recipe, right? I think about all the things that I wish I knew how to cook, that I've half practiced by sitting at the apron strings, but I have no measurement for any of these things. So how did you go about, okay, now we have to quantify and make a recipe out of something that was really just an oral tradition?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you're right. I think a lot of people from that generation, my grandparents' generation, I think about Vertimer Grosner's vibration cooking, like people cook through like feeling, using their senses to kind of measure ingredients. And so like, I feel like the magic in the kitchen is that space between a recipe and like, just, I think it's about spontaneity, creativity, like just using what's on hand. I always say, and maybe I'm running, but I always say that recipes should just be a guide. Like, I don't think people should be wed to cookbooks. I think for people who may not be like proficient in cooking, they are great to help give you the foundational skills. But for example, if I have a recipe that calls for mustard greens, and you're growing Swiss chard at home, use the Swiss chard, swap out leafy greens. If you don't have whatever ingredient, think about what you can modify, think about what's, on hand. And so I feel like that's where a lot of the magic happens. And, but as an educator, as someone who started doing this work when I founded an organization called Be Healthy that used cooking as a way to engage and politicize young people around food issues, I know, because so many of them were disconnected from cooking. So many of them never cooked, I mean, we had young people in the Be Healthy, the program I founded in New York, who came in. I mean, these are high school students, and, some of them would be like, I don't drink water. I just drink sodas, or I haven't eaten a vegetable since I was like 10. And, there was no judgment for me because I understand the complicated reasons that they were making those choices. But at the same time, we had to teach them how to cook. And so I know that a lot of people at home will get a little nervous if you're like a handful of this, a pinch. What's a pinch? I need a measurement. What is a pinch? What's the quantity? So I'm very meticulous about like writing recipes in a way that the the person who only knows how to boil a pot of water, they can come into the book and feel like they have a lot of the tools to cook with it. I'll tell you one of the criticisms that I hear from a lot of people, and I'm not even ashamed of this, it is what it is, but a lot of people, because I read comments on Amazon.com, but I shouldn't. But from there, and just like hearing like the scuttlebutt, a lot of people are like, I love your recipes, they're really delicious, but they just take too much time. They take too much labor. It's too much. And I'll say that I don't necessarily think that most of the recipes in my list are meant to cook on weeknights, because it's all from scratch. You're not going to find all these fake vegan, fake meat products, fake oil, just the stuff that I think a lot of people who eat plant-based will lean on. I'm like, look, I'm not going to make you spend money on some like, fake cream that has all these like additives and preservatives. I'm going to show you how to make cashew cream from scratch. Yeah, it might take a little longer. You might need to do it a day ahead that you make the dish, but I want people to feel like they have the tools to make really clean, delicious food. And I say that, maybe it means doing it on a weekend. Maybe it means gathering with family and friends to do it. And in fact, I encourage people to do that. Capitalism convinces us that we need to address everything as an individual. We need to do it on ourselves. Even when we talk about like improving health, I think so many people get stuck in this place where they think that consumer action and individual kind of like agency is the thing that we need to do to fix all this. And it's not. That's a part of it, but we need to think about how we make changes in community. We need to think about how we make changes on policies, And so I always say that slow food cooking is important, building community is important. And think about this. What if, maybe you making some of my recipes might take all Saturday, right? But what if on Saturday morning, you gathered with 6 or 7 of your friends, you all went to Grand Army Plaza, you pooled your money to collectively buy ingredients at the farmer's market. You get in the freshest, most local ingredients. You come back to someone's home who has like a big kitchen and appliances. Everyone collectively cooks together. You make 7 different from scratch meals. You're kicking it, you're drinking wine, you're smoking a little something, whatever. And then you are able to like build community with friends and family. And then everybody leaves with these fresh from scratch meals that you can freeze, you can put up, and you got like good food for the rest of the week. So that for me is the way in which we can kind of reimagine how we do this outside of our individual self, outside of our nuclear family, and really bring in and call community to help us to be better.
Ooh, I'm now like, you've given me something else to look forward to in a post-COVID world. And feeling like something else that it's stolen. I can't wait. Like that sounds like a phenomenal idea. And especially again, having the community support in living a more nutritious and healthful life, and then sharing that kind of that life, that love, living food with the people that you love the most. Okay. I'm in. Now I'm understanding why you are so popular right now, because you are the real deal, and that shows through. How did you know that then you were ready in your journey to write the book about it? Because that's a far cry from, okay, I'm having this experience and I'm working in whatever space I'm working in, and now it's time for me to write a book about it.
That's a great question. And this is Afropunk. I'm talking to you. So I'm going to give you like the real, not just the prepackaged answer. I'm going to give you the real deal answer. And part of that is I imagine greatness for myself in that, when I think about greatness, it's about like me doing something to contribute to the greater good. And I knew I wanted to do something because having done the work around like, food, justice issues, working with young people in New York City and seeing the impact that we had in New York and regionally. And I really felt like I was onto something and I wanted to have a national platform. And I always thought that writing a book would give me that kind of national and even international platform. And so one of my neighbors in Brooklyn was this woman, Anna LePay. She comes from a family of food activists. Her mother wrote this book in the 70s, Died for a Small Planet, that pushed back against this notion that we don't have enough food to feed people. And that's why we're dealing with issues around hunger and food insecurity. But no, it's about like how food is allocated and how corporations are actually like just ruining our food system. The point is, Anna and I linked up, and you know, there was a part of me that was like, man, we just have great chemistry. I think we could write a book together, but I didn't want to bring it up because I wanted her to know that I was genuinely interested in being friends with her and building. And then she was like, we should write a book together. And I was like,
manifested
okay, sure.
it.
And I'll say that that relationship, like that whole arc of events, I would say that was put in motion through meditation, through prayer, through vision boards, through all this stuff that wasn't so specific, but just was like, I want all the resources and energy and tools to come to me that will help me to be of best service to our people, to the greater world around these issues that I'm starting to care about so dearly, health, food, farming. And so it was great working with Anna because, you know, we went on tour. Her mother had just happened to be doing, like, they had done a recent reprint or a kind of anniversary issue of Died for a Small Planet. So I got to go on tour with an OG who was showing me the ropes. In fact, even before, like, you know, the important steps that I think a lot of people who, you know, I'm sure a lot of people out there are budding authors or who might be interested in getting into publishing. And there are a lot of steps that take place before you get to being out on tour and writing a book. You have to write a book proposal. You need to oftentimes find an agent or an attorney to help kind of negotiate and shop your deal around. You have to write the book. Then you have to, like, put a lot of energy into marketing and promotion. And having, like, this OG who had been doing it since the 70s, who guided us and helped us out and got us an agent and got us a bigger, much more, the advance was so much more than we should have gotten. It's like, you know, young authors like that, but it was great. And I, you know, that relationship and having that coaching and mentorship is one of the reasons that I'm so committed to being a mentor. I, you know, have so many informal and formal relationships to budding authors, both in the cookbook space and otherwise. And I just feel like I want to pay it forward. And I really take that seriously, like mentoring people, helping them understand the ins and outs of this often kind of like cloistered industry. And then also, I have some things that move beyond just the kind of individual personal relationships that are going to be happening in 2021 moving forward that are more like structural, me leading initiatives to actually ensure that more BIPOC folks have access to the publishing industry and are able to find their way in the media space. So we'll circle back to that at another point.
Can't wait. Can't wait. Can you tell us, so you did say something about 2021. What do you have coming out in 2021?
2021, I have a book that I've been working on since the shelter in place. Well, I'll say since the uprising started, when, you know, the anti-racist movement was building and the uprising jumped off 3-4 months ago, whenever. It feels like 3-4 years ago at this point. But, you know, I was really pushing myself in that moment to consider what I could do more to give back, right? What could I do? And, you know, we were going on family caravan protests to support the movement in the streets. And I was donating money to a number of organizations that I'm committed to supporting, namely Critical Resistance, who does a lot of prison abolition work. But I was like, what more can I do given my skill set, my social, you know, my platform, my connections. And so my agent and I pitched this book, Black Food, to my publisher, and they bought it immediately. And they really understand the importance of this book, and I'm glad that they got it. And so Black Food is a collection of recipes, artwork, and essays. And the book is inspired by, because, you know, if we talk about this book, we have to talk about my residency at MOAD, which is the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And so in 2015, the former executive director, Linda Harrison, created this position for me. And she's like, you know, in a city like San Francisco, that because of out-migration of Black folks, largely caused by the proliferation of the tech industry and gentrification, the population has gone from about 13-14% maybe a decade ago to around 3% now, right? So imagine the impact that that's had on the soul of that city. And she just got that this museum can play a much bigger role than just doing fine art exhibitions. And so I create public programming where I bring scholars and activists and authors and all these people who are doing food work in to do everything from intimate conversations to panel discussions, to dinners. We actually have converted the lobby of the museum into a dining room and done dinners there. And I've always thought, how can we take this magical and brilliant and groundbreaking program to the world? Porscha, the first program we had in 2015 was called Black Women, Food and Power. And I really thought it was important to start in that place and to uplift and celebrate Black women and the role that they played historically and in the contemporary moment around the production, distribution, and consumption of food and food knowledge. Because there are a few scholars on there who've written books about food. And you know, the fact that we had people who came from the East Coast, from New York City to the Bay Area for a 2-hour program, it showed me that there was a deep, pun intended, hunger for this type of programming. And so that's what this book is really kind of building on that. And so it's going to have, like, I've worked with a number of artists from around the world to commission these pieces or licensed pieces that open up each chapter. I mean, just last week I talked to people in Freetown, Sierra Leone, Accra, Ghana, Nairobi, Kenya, Cape Town, and Johannesburg, South Africa. These are all contributors to this book. So it's going to be a truly global book that celebrates our food. And we talked about the Black Book and your connection with Toni Morrison and getting an opportunity to edit that book, the kind of anniversary edition, and meet her. Toni Morrison, she has a quote where she talks about racism being a distraction, and the way in which, you know, when we're so consumed with the albatross of white supremacy around our necks, it prevents us from being our fully brilliant, creative, and human selves. And that's what this book is about. You can't write a book like this without acknowledging the historical and contemporary ways in which we've been invisibilized, marginalized, exploited. But we know that this is FUBU. This is for us, by us. I want people to look in and join the conversation, but this book is written for us and it's by us. And for me, it's just like, what does our lives and our work look like when we aren't distracted by racism? When we're like sinking into our agency, our magic, our brilliance, our creativity. And so that's the energy of this book. And what I want people to do is I want people to find it useful in the kitchen. There'll be 80 recipes, beautiful photographs for each recipe, but I want it to also live on people's nightstands, their coffee tables, their credenzas. Like, this will be a multifunctional book. And it's the book that we need, because I think it's gonna also build a global community and using food as a connective tissue that's bringing us all together. So I'm all here for Black food.
Ooh, I'm all here for Black food, and I feel guilty because I'll get to read it before a lot of other people, but I can't wait for everybody to be able to read it. Mm-hmm. Speaking of community, it is really a blessing to be here in this Afropunk space and know that there are so many people who are likely inspired by what you have to say right now. We'd love to open that up. Is that okay with you, to open it up to questions from those folks? To make sure that this is serving them, I know, as much as it is enriching me to be in this conversation. So if you would like to ask a question of Bryant, please do unmute yourself. Our stage managers should be allowing for that to happen now. And I look forward to hearing what is on your mind, if there aren't any. Because I have tons of other questions that I can ask if nobody else does. And they're going to involve music. I'm just going to say that now, because also in Vegetable Kingdom, you have a spread, right? That includes album Stakes as High as on Top. And you're from Memphis. Like, I'm just so curious. You got Gangstar in there, Public Enemy, Mad Villainy.
I'm from Memphis. I'm a hip hop, East Coast 90s hip hop. That's my zone. I love Memphis. Look, I love Memphis rap. I love the fact that the kind of predominant sound in rap now is really, I'm like, this is stuff that people in Memphis were doing 20 years ago, but that's a whole other conversation. But, you know, I wanted to say something that was interesting, because this book came to me and, you know, we were doing the deals and, you know, signing all the contracts. And then I remember it was about a week before, you know, the folks at 10 Speed Press, my publisher, was like, okay, you know, you can announce next week. I think everything is set or whatever. And then I heard that there's this new book coming out by Jenna Wortham and Kimberly Drew
Black
called
Futures.
Black Futures. And I was like, oh my God, and so then somebody had sent it to me like, oh, do you know about this book? And it was like, it's like essays and tweets and memes and recipes. And I'm like, oh my God, man, that sounds so similar to what I'm doing. People gonna think I bit that idea. Like, I should have announced it 2 weeks ago. What's going on? But once I got over my initial kind of like anxiety that people gonna feel like I, bit the idea, I was like, I'm glad that they're writing this book. And then I saw Marcus Samuelsson has this book that was recently published where he talks about like kind of celebrating Black farmers in the States, Black farmers and chefs. I still haven't read it. Big up to Osai. And so, I was just like, you know what? This is beautiful because this is the moment. There's a zeitgeist where we're like one mind, one spirit, one connection. We're all like interrelated. And so this is a moment where we're about like celebrating our culture and like, like further adding to this Black canon that I would say, like the Black book that Toni Morrison edited is kind of like one of the precursors to. And so I hope that Black food encourages 15 other people to do a book similar to this, where they're, creating collections that celebrate our food in a way that they think makes sense. So I'm just excited about this period where Black art and Black cultural production is about to be off the chain because, well, a lot of reasons, but I'm excited.
And it's interesting to know Black Futures, when I first heard about that project, and shout out to Jenna Wortham and Kimberly Drew, and to our One World colleagues for making that happen.
Yeah.
Chris Jackson, Nicole Counts, Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, we are all very excited that they are leaders in this space right now. But when I first heard about that project, what inspired it was the Black Book. And to hear you, yeah, absolutely. And as Chris Jackson and I had the opportunity to talk about the Black Book, it was their book picks up where this book leaves off, right? This book ends in 1945 for very explicit reasons. And so what carries that forward? And to think about how many people have been inspired by this. Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about being inspired by the Black Book. His father, Paul Coates, same thing. And so to know that you were inspired by that art, again, made 1973, what that looks like now that you have the resources and the influence, the social capital, the platform to be able to build something on the shoulders of those giants, like that is the moment. And as fraught and as painful and as devastating and sad as so much of the moment is, there is so much light, and it's coming from within, and it's connecting to each other. And it's exciting. It is exciting. It's an exciting time to be in this biz. What would you recommend for someone who wants to break into the culinary book biz right now?
That's a great question. I often say that if you're hoping to write a cookbook, I discourage people from looking at it as a money-making venture. Ideally, you'll get a little bit of an advance, you'll earn your advance out, and then you will start getting royalty checks. But I see the role of cookbooks, like I think about, and part of this is the way in which, we fetishize corporations. And oftentimes, if you have the backing or the co-signing of a corporation, then that makes you legit, right? You could be doing some dope work at home. You could be a dope blogger. You could be a home cook. But then if you get a book deal or some type of co-signing for this corporation, it's like, oh, you made it. You real now. And so understanding that reality and the psychology of people, I always say that a book is like the best calling card that you can have, because it will set you apart from the hundreds of other food bloggers who are out there, because you now have this tangible book project that people can buy. And I, think about like, I think especially in a historical moment like this, where it's just clear that there is no economic stability. I was reading an article the other day about how people who have like done it right and have like, made money and put money in savings and tried to invest, and like all that's been wiped away over the past 6, 7, 8 months because of this shelter in place and everything that's going on. And so, I'm just a hustler. I've always had that hustle ethic. I think a lot of that comes from like really fetishizing like, you know, underground hip hop and like we're just like, we're gonna do it ourselves. Like forget these major labels. We're gonna start our indie label. We're gonna do it and make it happen. And so that's just been my approach. And I think that I encourage people to be, you know, entrepreneurs. Even if you have a 9 to 5, like get your hustle on, start your little, you know, side hustles so that if you have something like a book project, you have all these things lined up. So when your book project comes out and you're getting the promotion and everything, not only are you promoting that book, but you're sending people to your other projects that may be revenue generating. You might have a book that you sold to a big publisher and you get an advance and maybe you never see any of that money, you know. But what if you have an ebook that you're selling for $5? All that money's coming to you. And so I want to suggest a book. I mean, that's the whole thing, but I think in terms of nuts and bolts skills on how to think about like entering the publishing space. Ariel Eckstutt, who is my former literary agent, and I'm not just saying this because she wrote it with her husband, David Sherry. It's just a brilliant book because there are a lot of books that I've read on how to write a book proposal, how to get into publishing. This book, the original title was Putting Your Passion into Print, but they did a kind of reboot and they have a different title, but it is one of the most comprehensive, approachable, and actually really like humorous books because they're kind of, you know, funny, that takes you from the embryonic stage through writing a proposal, through marketing and promotion. So for anybody who's just like thinking about writing a book, check out that book by Ariel Eckstutt and her husband, David. It's a great resource, and I've given it to like 24 people. So
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's definitely something I will keep on my shelf too, because obviously I answer that question in a variety of ways, and I only, so thank you for pointing out a very useful resource. This is a music festival, and so I do want to ask, what are you listening to right now? If we could be at Afropunk, who would you want to see on that stage right now?
Man, I mean, I'll tell you, I don't know if he's like, I'm sure he'd still be down for it. I would love to see Anderson .Paak at Afropunk. He's one of my favorite musicians, and you know, in terms of like the younger cats, and I just think he's so just, you know, he's a virtuoso. He can sing, he can rhyme, he plays drums, and he's just so charismatic and just has good energy. And I've seen him live a couple times, but you know, if there's anybody you talk like who you want to see live right now in terms of like a living artist, take me to an Anderson .Paak show any day. I want to see him. But yeah, I think about like I don't know, like the Burnt Sugar. They're kind of like an old school New York, Brooklyn crew. I think about the Internet. I love them. In fact, I saw the Internet when when I was at Afropunk in 2014. Big up to Sid and the whole crew. Who else? Afropunk.
There's one that's right at the forefront of my mind. It's my white whale. Doom. MF Doom.
You're a Doom fan?
I am a Doom fan.
Oh, see?
And I was this close to seeing maybe Doom, maybe a fake in concert a couple years ago in 2014, actually in February. And it got snowed out and I was very upset. And I don't know that I'll ever have that opportunity. Have you ever seen Doom and known that it was the real Doom in a concert?
MF Doom is Mike's Down, my favorite MC, across the board, old school, new school, whatever. Daniel Dumoulin. I mean, just like KMD, like that was one of my favorite hip hop groups back in the day. And I will say this, I think, and I'm not even mad at Doom for this, but I think I saw Imposter Doom. I think it was like he was sending out like the imposters to come perform, probably chilling in Grenada on the beach somewhere. So I don't think I saw the real Doom, but you know, as kind of like a performance art piece, I'm like, yo, that's brilliant. You just like got other fools out here who don't even like look like you, who aren't even like have the same like girth, you know, just as big as he is. They're like, did you lose a lot of weight, Doom? I'm just gonna send whoever out. So big up to Doom.
Big up to Doom. And celebrate all of you who have had the opportunity to see the real Doom in concert. We're jealous.
Can I tell you my favorite? Well, I'll tell you one of my favorite, like, blow my mind, all the connections concerts, and I'll tell you one of my favorite hip hop concerts.
Ooh, so they're not the same. Okay.
Yeah. So favorite when I was living in New York, I decided to, you know, I wanted, before I started this organization, Be Healthy, that used cooking as a way to engage young people. I was like, I need to like improve my cooking skills. So I went to culinary school, and I was determined not to take out a loan. And I was like, I just want to pay for this out of pocket. So I was working full time. I was going to culinary school, and my girlfriend at the time moved into my tiny ass studio apartment in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, just so we can cut costs. And like, it just was getting tense during the winter. And so one thing I was like, you know what, I need to have a practice, a spiritual practice that allows me to like recenter, ground, and also gets me out the house. And so I was doing yoga all the time. And that's when I started to really get into Ravi Shankar, the sitarist.
Mm-hmm.
And so been a jazz fan, John Coltrane, favorite, right? So I got an opportunity to go to a concert at Carnegie Hall that was featuring, Ravi Shankar, his daughter, Anushka Shankar, Ravi Coltrane, the son of John Coltrane, who was named after Ravi Shankar, and Alice Coltrane, John Coltrane's widow. Crazy. Wow. Like, that concert was just mind-blowing. But favorite hip-hop concert, SOBs. You know about SOBs.
I miss SOBs.
SOBs. This was right before Stankonia was going to drop. This was like in the beginning of promotion. It was before it actually dropped. Outkast did a performance at SOBs, and you know SOBs is like a small club.
Yeah, it's tiny.
Once Stankonia came out, they were only doing stadiums, right? So this was kind of the last moment that you saw them in an intimate space like that, and that was one of the most electrifying shows I've ever been to. And I'll tell you one thing that blew me away. Like, I was always a big fan of Andre 3000, and I was just like, feels like he's one of the dopest lyricists. But being at that show that night, I was like, that dude is magnetic. Like, you could not take your eyes off of him. He just exudes such like just brilliance and great energy, and just like, so big up to Outkast.
Pick up to Outkast. So that's 2 for 2. Nick Stone was here with us yesterday and celebrated Outkast as her favorite group as well. So let's see how tomorrow goes. For this East Coast girl, I will rep Tribe Called Quest till day I die. Yeah. No disrespect to Outkast, of course. Well, not like none whatsoever. I would never. But you know, gotta rep your hometown. Bryant, thank you so much for taking your time to spend with us today. Thank you again, Afropunk. Bryant, do you have any last words that you want to leave with us?
I want to say feature people. You know, this moment has really been sobering in that, you know, we hear a lot about how people are kind of one paycheck away from really struggling. And there have been people in our community, not even theoretical, not anecdotal, like we've known people who both of the parents, because there have been a number of families we've known where both people got laid off at the beginning of this, and like, you know, went from being middle class, you know, having at least imagined economic stability, and folks are really struggling now. And so I think that we need to fight, you know, as we're hurtling towards fascism, we need to be pushing back against, you know, everything that's going on at the federal level and beyond. But I don't think there's like mutual aid, caring for the people in our community, like that's important. You know, I can't emphasize enough how we need to be both keeping our eye on like what's happening in our communities, and also keep an eye on how we need to change these larger oppressive structures. We can what do they say? Chew gum and walk at the same time. So take care of your people, feed your people.
Feed your people. Thank you, Bryant. Thank you, Afropunk. And be well, everyone.